Hallelujah. 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 God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ and entrusting to us the message of salvation. Hallelujah. 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 The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. Two people went up to the temple area to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee took his position and spoke this prayer to himself. "Oh God, I thank you, I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I pay tithes on my whole income." But the tax collector stood off at a distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and prayed, "Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, the latter went home justified, not the former. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to the 30th Sunday in Ordinary Time. If you remember last week, we had the widow and the dishonest judge. And the entire message was about persistence in prayer. Jesus is continuing that discussion about prayer in today's gospel. So I guess a good place to start would be to ask the question, what exactly is prayer? I mean, we throw that word around all the time. You know, we need to pray. I'm not praying enough. How about you? I've been praying a lot about it. I've been praying for you. What is prayer? And I guess the simple answer to that will be, well, it's when we talk to God, and that is true. But of course, the church, you know, we get a little more, how do we say, a little more definite in our definition of prayer. We break down prayer into four types of prayer. We have the prayer of petition, the prayer of thanksgiving, the prayer of contrition, and the prayer of adoration. I'd like to talk just a little bit about these types of prayer. First of all, the prayer of petition is where most of us live, most of the time. And that's when we're asking for something. We're asking that maybe that job interview might go well, or maybe that relationship might come to me, or maybe Notre Dame will win the game, you know, that kind of thing. It's Air Force, so I don't think we got a real problem tonight, but just as soon as I say that. But prayer that is asking for something that we think that we need. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we're encouraged by the Lord himself to ask in his name. It'll be granted to you by my Father. But I always like to keep in mind the old saying that, you know, be careful what you ask for, because maybe it isn't necessarily what you really need in the end. We do spend most of our time asking because oftentimes God is reduced to Santa Claus and we bring him our list. Most of the time it's, you know, for our good causes. Other people are sick, other people are hurting. We bring these prayers. That's the first time. The second is the prayer of thanksgiving. Now, I guess the most common prayer of thanksgiving would be what we call grace before meals. I have a good friend, Father Gallagher. I remember the first time I met him. He's a bald, middle-aged man like me, and I thought I was looking in the mirror when I met him. He looks just like he could be my brother, which, by the way, my brother actually is here, over here. This is Dave. My brother's coming to visit me, so I'm a little nervous preaching in front of my brother. But anyway, Father Gallagher's got this thing that he lives up in Fairmont. He's been doing this for years. If he's out in a public restaurant and he sees somebody praying, a table praying before their meals, he will go over and buy dinner for the person that led the prayer. Which is a pretty awesome thing, but what he tells me is over 10 years, 15 years, I don't know, he can count on one hand how many times he's done it. Because people are not overly demonstrative in public. Certainly Catholics, who bless yourself like this, like we're hiding ourselves or something. Not politically correct. Some people don't feel comfortable praying in public, but I think that the bigger reason is because we are so caught up in life and the pace of life that oftentimes we don't take the time to even stop and recognize the many gifts and thanksgiving things that we have, that God has given to us. Because we're so caught up in the frenetic pace of life, we don't even stop to say, wow, thank you. That's the second prayer. The third is the prayer of contrition, and that's the I'm sorry I messed up, okay? Newsflash, my friend. Nobody gets through life without messing up. We are all in need of forgiveness. And the thing about the prayer of contrition is that it highlights a very powerful axiom, which is we are wholly dependent upon God. We are wholly dependent upon God, and not only that we believe that all that is seen by an unseen God. There are no secrets in heaven. That's the prayer of contrition. And finally, there's the prayer of adoration. This is the rarest of prayer. It's probably the most spiritually advanced prayer. And the prayer of adoration is when you take yourself in the presence of God and you just be. You know that old saying, be still and know that I am God. There's a great prayer, meditative prayer there. Be still and know that I'm God. And then just keep on dropping off the word. And you say that and then you say, be still and know that I am. And then be still and know. And then be still. And then finally it's just be, right? It's like that Zen Buddhist kind of in the moment. I'm not asking. I don't have my hands out. You can't have a prayer of adoration while you're asking for something. So it's got to be, I'm present to you, thy will be done, which is, of course, the prayer of Gethsemane, the greatest prayer of all. So those are your four types of prayer. Now, with that said, let's talk about our gospel. We have two characters, the Pharisee and the tax collector. We know that the Pharisee is held up, vaunted by the culture. He's the example of how we should live. He is the personification of how we are justified in the name of Yahweh, right? By following the law, by doing the prescribed things, and entering into sacrificial temple worship in the best way that we can, and we check all the boxes, and we're doing all the right things. This is the Pharisee, okay? Now, on the other hand, you have the tax collector, who I guess would be like a modern-day equivalent of the Hell's Angel, okay? He's the lost soul. He's the sinner. And he's despised. We know he's despised because as a tax collector, he's considered to be a traitor who sold his soul to Rome. The way taxes were collected in the ancient world was that a wealthy person, a Jewish wealthy person, would go to the Romans and say, you know what, I think I can give you $400,000 for Greenbrier County for the year. And other people will bid, and then finally Rome will say, okay, $400,000, that's the top bid, we'll give it to you. And now that person has the full faith and credit of the Roman government to go out and collect $400,000 worth of taxes for Greenbrier County to pay Rome. Now, should he collect more than $400,000? Well, guess who gets to keep it? Pure profit, right? So that's the tax collector, and he's despised because he's in collusion with the enemy. And he's making a lot of money on it. So here you have these two characters, the hero and the anti-hero. And they go into the temple. Now, like I said, the Pharisee represents the law. He represents everything that you're supposed to do. And not only, he's extreme. Not only does he do the law, but he doubles it. For example, when he says, twice a week. Well, you're only supposed to fast once a week. So he's doubly good, right? I pay tithes on my whole income. Well, you're allowed to keep a certain amount of that income and not pay tithes on it as a religious cleric. But no, he pays tithes on everything. So this is like super bad Pharisee, right? He walks into that temple and he brings a Greek word called, didakaminos, which means to be justified. Now, this isn't like an arrogant type of justification. Well, I guess it sort of is. But it is in Leviticus, this word, didakaminos. You are justified by the law. So he comes in, I'm justified, right? Now, the tax collector comes in. He's got a different word. And his word is halaskamaya, which means forgiveness, I need your mercy. So he's not justifying himself. He's saying, I'm having, Lord have mercy on me, I'm a sinner. Which, by the way, is an excellent act of contrition. In the sacrament we have in the church called confession. You might have heard about it. It's kind of going out of fashion, but we still have it. Okay, so at the end, you can simply say, Lord have mercy on me, a sinner. That is an excellent act of contrition. So anyway, the Pharisee goes in there justified because he is righteous. And the tax collector goes in there and he is looking for mercy. And we know what happens. You remember when Jesus said, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees? Remember that? That yeast is looking down the aisle at that low-life tax collector and saying, well, I'm sure glad I'm not here. And I fear that same yeast of arrogant and self-serving, pompous, self-religiosity pumps up many of us as we look at other people in the fallen world and we go, well, I'm just glad I'm not them. They're the people that Jesus came for. They're the people, if they came into the church and sat in the back aisle and Jesus showed up, he's the one he'd go back and welcome. They're the ones that we buy gospel about. The yeast of the Pharisees is that idea that, you know what? I'm pretty good. And I'm good enough. And that's the lesson of this gospel, is that there is no good enough. Because if there was good enough, he certainly would have made the mark. But he didn't, right? 2 people went in, one left justified. And it wasn't the one that we thought it was. It was the one that came begging for mercy. The lesson that we learn is simply this. We all fall short of the glory of God, period. We are all sinners. Every one of us. And when we stand in front of the blinding light of holiness in heaven, there are no secrets. There's no place to hide. Nothing. There's no shadows. Except the shadow of the cross, which is where this tax collector is going to, right? Give me mercy. Give me mercy. I'm a sinner. We are speeding fast to the end of the liturgical year. We're about ready to make that turn into Advent, which is a penitential season. It's a time for cleaning it up. It's a time for getting ready. And this gospel is kind of preparing us for that, by reminding us that we are sinners in need of a Savior. You know, Pope Francis recently gave an interview, and he doesn't like giving interviews. He doesn't like to talk about himself. He's a humble man, but he gave an interview to this one Jesuit priest that was running this Italian newspaper or something, and he sat down with them, and the priest looked at him, and he asked one of those touchy-feely Barbara Walters, if you were a tree, right? And his name is George. Francis is his pope, but his real name is George Bergoglio or something like that, from Argentina. And so he looks at him and he says, so tell me, who is George? And then he just looks at him. And Pope Francis was kind of taken back by this. It seemed like he was almost a little irritated by the question, kind of like, oh good, you're going to go there. He just kind of sat there, and he didn't answer for a long time. And finally, after a long bit of pretty good and, knowledgeable about other things, but other areas, not so much. But, I kind of come back to the original. I'm just a sinner. Because you see, he knows who he is. And he's the Holy Father. He's the vicar of Christ. And if he's a sinner, what does that make you? Well, what does that make me? And the question, as we turn to move into Advent, is, do we recognize that? And if we do recognize that, what are we going to